Strangers in the dark, trying to find the part where your heart turned cold. Got so many questions, but I know all the answers. That's what hurts the most. I'm chasing all the highs and endless nights together. I'm holding on cause I'm not good on my own. And I know goodbye is just a fix for something better. Cause you're letting go and I'm still pulling you close. I hope that you're better now, now that I'm not around. It kills me to let you down, but I had to leave. You took a piece of me and that's all I'll ever be. Stuck in a memory of what we used to be. I hope that you're better now, better now, better now, better now. Better now, better now, better now. I hope that you're better now, now that I'm not around.
Okay. How everyone feeling today? Everyone ready for the panel, for the discussion? All right, good. Thank you for the cheering. I will say that people on the left, you don't have a great view of us on the panel, but you might not want a good view of me specifically, so that's totally up to you if you want to move. Okay, so we're here to discuss best practices for moving to Jira Service Management. And so part of what we want to present to you today is two customers who have moved to Jira Service Management within the last couple of years. George and Bill are here to talk about their stories. How are you guys doing today?
Doing fantastic. I'm freaking nervous.
Well, we're relaxing. We're taking it easy.
All right.
We're taking it easy. So George is with Brooks. He is the senior manager of service delivery, and Bill is with Applied System. He's the director of IT.
Hey, folks.
And so, fellas, let's do an intro. Let's introduce your companies to everyone who's speaking, introduce your career at Brooks and Applied Systems, and give us a little fun factoid about both companies. George, let's start with you.
Okay. Greetings, folks. I've been in IT for about 30 years, 20 of which has been with Brooks running. I've spent that 20 years building IT operations there, and then I recently transitioned to IT service delivery. We've been using JSM for about 2 years now. And I would say the most interesting thing about Brooks is the way we place ourselves in the market. A lot of companies in our industry, they hedge their revenue bets by making multiple product lines, like for sports, football, basketball, baseball, maybe cross trainers and CrossFit. For Brooks, we focus on runners and running, that's it.
And they make good shoes representing. All right, Bill, your turn.
Cool. So Bill Hall, Applied Systems, Director of IT. So we're a software development company in the insurance space. So I've been with the company for about 3 years now. We've been on JSM for about 2. So that was one of my first projects that we really ran for. Interesting thing about our company, so we just celebrated our 40th year anniversary. So been around for a while, real happy about that. We've got the traditional, we started in our founder's garage. But what was really unique is we graduated from our founder's garage to renting rooms in a hotel. And that's how we operated for a couple of years. I think it was a Hilton where we were working out of. So we've since matured. We're now in legitimate offices. We've got a global presence, so no more hotels for us, which I'm very happy to not support.
And they saved a lot of money by moving out of the hotel.
Yeah, and hotel Wi-Fi sucks.
Okay, and so while both of them are talking about their migration to Jira Service Management, the thing that is common between both of them is they moved from ServiceNow. And so that was the tool they were using before. And so, George, let's start with you. Talk to us about, let's go in the past. 2-3 years ago, you're on ServiceNow. What was that like? What were you using it for? And what was the tipping point that made you think, hey, we've got to move on to something different?
Yeah. So when we started with ServiceNow, we licensed the entire ITSM suite, all of the modules that came with that package. But over time, we found it very difficult to get additional funding for the product, even resources to manage it. And it got worse for us when ServiceNow, they changed their licensing model, and we had to scale back to save costs and just keep some of the modules that were more critical to us. So I would say costs and care and feeding kind of drove that wedge between us and ServiceNow, but the real tipping point was our growth. We were growing globally, we were expanding, and in that expansion, we saw our IT team start to change. So silos started to emerge, and they started to shed some of the services that they once owned into the teams that I was managing. So as they fled, they started using Jira, and they started using demo products at Jira, and they were able to get small funding for paid versions of Jira. So now we had two versions or two sources of work management for our ITSM, but neither were configured to show value. We couldn't get any data out of the solutions to show value to the organization.
And so if anyone's using ServiceNow in the audience, we find that the ITSM use case is the most common, right? And Bill, I believe that was the same for you.
Yeah, exactly. So we were, it was our ITSM platform. We'd had it for a number of years before I got there. We were doing incident request, change. We even built a custom procurement module inside it as well. Challenge that we had with the product is, I mean, ServiceNow, it's a good software. It's been the industry leader for a long, long time. And you can do a lot with it, but you need a team. You really need developers, you really need analysts, you really need to spend time to try and get the most out of it. And our leadership was not giving us headcount to properly support the platform. We had an outsourced model. I had folks on my service desk that were trying to do the requirements for all the changes, and it was just a mess. We were getting a big backlog of requests. We weren't able to keep up with what the business needed, and we were getting further and further away from what we needed operating on ServiceNow from when we first implemented it. On top of that, we were maturing as a company. We were looking to start implementing configuration management databases. We were looking to start centralize a lot of our operations. And while we could do that in ServiceNow, I didn't have the headcount, and the costs were ridiculous. Trying to do discovery within ServiceNow, we were looking at third-party solutions. We were still having to pay high licensing costs. It didn't make sense. And then we had a renewal coming up, and that is always a fantastic time to look at switching platforms. So we started doing the evaluation with all the pain points. For us, JSM really quickly emerged as a front runner, as somebody that could solve a lot of these problems for us quite well in a cost-effective manner.
And so something that's really common about both of your stories was that in the past, while you were both on ServiceNow, you were both users of Jira software. And so that was kind of part of, well, I'm not going to spoil it. Bill, let's keep going with you. You're ready to move. You're kind of like, hey, ServiceNow isn't working. You've got the renewal coming up. What was the evaluation process with Jira Service Management like, and how did you pick that solution?
So we looked at a lot of our stakeholders. Our company, we have our development teams were already on Jira. As a company, we had standardized on Confluence as our kind of internal wiki, our internal portal for all of our documentation information. Our customer teams are using Salesforce. Our operations teams were using ServiceNow. And for us, we saw this as an opportunity to say, hey, if we're going to consolidate and move to a different platform, two obvious choices for us would be to look at Salesforce or to look at the Atlassian JSM product. I quickly canned the idea of Salesforce. That is not, it's great for what it does. It's not a great ITSM platform. JSM really started jumping forward. So we had folks that had experience with Jira Service Desk in the past. It was a pretty basic tool, but when we were evaluating 2.5, 3 years ago, Atlassian was making a huge investment in the product. They were doing acquisitions. They were really building out the capabilities. And what I liked about what Atlassian was doing is they had a more of an open platform approach as compared to ServiceNow. So ServiceNow tries to be all things for everybody. And there are certain parts of the platform that work really, really well. There's a lot of parts of the platform that just suck. Like, they are hard to interact with and hard to use. And with the way ServiceNow does its licensing, you really have to buy a lot of things that you're just not going to use, and you sit them on the shelf. What I liked about Atlassian's approach is they're not trying to be all things to everybody. They've got the core platform. They've got a very well-documented open API, so if there's things that you want to integrate with, if there's things that you want to do yourself, you can actually write code if you want to. Or they've got a really robust marketplace. So you can go out to the marketplace and pick the unique components that solve problems that your business has, because I can guarantee everybody in here probably has about 70 to 80%. They do things the exact same way, but there's about 20 to 30% that makes your company unique. And those are where you start having a lot of your challenges and your problems with what you're trying to implement. And Jira just had and Atlassian with JSM had a much better approach, in our opinion, to being able to pick and choose and customize the product to how we needed it, using either self-developed applications or going out to the marketplace and picking and choosing.
George, your turn. What was that decision-making process like at Brooks?
So as Bill mentioned, ServiceNow can do everything, and we knew it could be the long-term and short-term solution for us. But at Brooks, we felt there were two major battles we would have to win if we were going to move forward with ServiceNow and keep it. It was cost and marketing, right? And we felt that if we won the cost battle without winning the marketing battle, it would kind of been a pointless win for us. So we reached out to our business. We engaged them. We wanted to know what was missing from our implementation of ServiceNow and what they were looking for. And as we started to look at their feedback, we realized that our implementation of ServiceNow was wholly untrusted because we couldn't get the funding to improve it and keep up with the pace of business. Nobody liked it. And we felt that if we won both battles and we kept ServiceNow, we would somehow have to hide that it was still ServiceNow. It was that bad for us. So we started looking at Jira Service Management. Almost immediately, we saw that we could use Jira Service Management to replace what we had going on in ServiceNow. So we took a deeper dive and we looked at their enhancement delivery and their future roadmap, and it became clear to us that JSM could be the near and long-term solution for us at Brooks.
Awesome. George, let's stick with you. So you pick Jira Service Management. You're kind of ready for the journey. You're ready to kind of make that migration off of ServiceNow. Can you talk to the audience about what that was like at Brooks?
Yeah, so at Brooks, inclusion is the center of our culture. We have a really good, great company culture at Brooks. We want everybody's involvement. We want their input. We want their feedback. So like I said before, we engaged the business, but we had to go into IT and see how they would take this. So because our development teams, our applications teams were using Jira, we started with them and they were on board. It was a real easy, quick win. They kind of applauded and told us, what took you guys so long to come to our side? So we went to some of the IT operations teams. And they weren't as easy of a sell for us, which was kind of a shock because, again, they didn't really like ServiceNow either. But they wanted more than just us saying we did our due diligence. They wanted more than a demo product or project that they could poke around in to see what out of the box JSM was like out of the box. So we had to reach out and engage our leadership. It was really important to her. She was the sponsor of this project, this transition. And so she brought us around. She came in and reminded everybody that there was a reason we're doing it, and it was going to happen with or without them. So get on board with the transition.
Bill, your turn.
Yeah, so for us, the journey, it went pretty quickly. We started out with just comms, letting people know, hey, we've made a decision. We're going to migrate from ServiceNow over to JSM. It's an IT project, so everyone's kind of like, ooh, yay. So there wasn't a ton of fanfare on it, but it was good for everyone to be aware that we were going to start making this journey. From there, we started pulling in key stakeholder groups, and we were looking for a representative not only from the people that were going to be fulfilling tickets and using JSM on the back end, but we were also getting representation from our user base. So we identified our most common users. How are they interacting with the portal? Because oftentimes when you do projects like this, you design it for the IT teams without really thinking about your end user customer, which is why so many of our user bases really don't like interacting with your traditional tools because they're not easy to use, they're not customer centric. So we tried to pull in those user teams in as well to be part of the core group that was helping with requirements and some of the design. We made some early scoping decisions to try and make the project easier. Anybody that's looking at a project like this, you're going to come up with the question, do I migrate all of my data out of my old platform? Unless you've got some sort of compliance reason, don't do it. You're going to spend months migrating data that you're probably never going to look at, or that you could get a snapshot of reports and get the same information without all the work. So we did some key scoping decisions, brought the stakeholders together, did a lot of our requirements. We spent some time thinking through standards. JSM's a fantastic, flexible product. Everybody can kind of do what they need to do. You want to establish some standards, so we went ahead and did that. And then from there, it was traditional. We did the implementation, user acceptance testing. We did training both for our fillers and with our end users, and went live right after New Year's. And to be honest, it wasn't all that exciting because it went smoothly, which is great. I mean, the best IT projects are the ones that no one really knows about or don't really pay attention to.
And so something that unites both of you is not obviously you moved off of ServiceNow, you moved to Jira Service Management, but you picked ISOs. You both picked us to help you with that project, help you with that migration.
Yeah.
Bill, can you talk a little bit more about our relationship, how we partnered with you for that migration?
Yeah, so when we were looking at implementers, I was at this conference a couple years ago and talked to a lot of partners that do JSM implementations. Like you're hearing a lot about JSM at this conference. I think we were one of the earlier adopters to go onto the platform. So a lot of people were talking about it, and they were telling me, we can get you on in a couple of weeks. We can get you on in a month. And frankly, that scared me. A project like this, yeah, the technology portion of it is not too difficult. It really comes down to, do you have a group that's doing a good job of defining your requirements? Do you have a good group that's really good at organizational change management? And ISO's, their approach to these areas far surpassed the other organizations that we talked to. Another thing that I really, really liked is ISO's had a number of people at their company that had spent years, if not over a decade, doing ServiceNow implementations. So these were folks that not only understood the Atlassian environment and how it worked, but they also understood how ServiceNow operated, and they could intimately understand how our processes were running on top of ServiceNow, and what were the things that we needed to make changes with how we operate, or updates, tweaks to our processes, so that they would run really effectively on JSM. A lot of people make the mistake of, I just want to lift everything I have in ServiceNow and put it into another platform. If you're trying to recreate ServiceNow on another piece of software, why not just stay with ServiceNow? There's a lot of new ways of operating that are significantly more effective and more efficient on JSM, and having a implementer that could help guide us and understand why we were thinking one way in ServiceNow and what were some of the tweaks that we needed to do going to JSM to really take advantage of it. That was a huge, huge selling point for us. And then I loved your guys' delivery model. They've got onshore, they've got nearshore, they've got offshore, so they can help meet price points. We went with the nearshore model, had a team out of Argentina that was absolutely fantastic. And I want to go to Argentina now.
We'll get you there. George, your turn.
Our journey was about the same. I didn't have to go find VARs. They kind of came to us. So we were going through this change. And so we had a lot of new IT leaders who brought their network in. So we started with that. We kind of went through their Rolodex. If there are older folks in the crowd who know what a Rolodex is. And we just kind of went through that list, culled through it. ISOs made the short list for sure. But what really stood out with ISOs is at the time they were actively retiring ServiceNow as well. And as we learned more about ISOs, we found that they were retiring ServiceNow for some of the same reasons we were. So, their delivery model and their team to scale budgets for the project, that was in consideration as well. But I think really you guys, eating your own dog food, so to speak, really tipped them in the favor for us.
Yeah. So we're still in the past. We're still migrating off of ServiceNow. We're still in the implementation phase. But it wasn't perfect, right? So George, we'll stick with you. Talk to me about roadblocks. Like what were the things in the project that, maybe didn't go so well and we had to adjust or, pivot?
Yeah. So our project stumbled off the blocks. So right out of the gate, we ran into a couple of issues. When we partnered with ISOs, we scaled the project so that they would provide JSM training, capability training, as well as, look at me. It was capability training. Oh, and project management.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. And almost immediately, we stumbled with both of those. We felt we weren't getting the information we were looking for from the academy training, and the project management level just wasn't what we needed for Brooks. And you guys doubled down. They made a real quick change and pivot, and they changed the academy sessions. We started getting the information the way we needed it. And they gave us the head of their PMO to run our project. So like just elevating their game real quick, really turned the project around, got it back on the rails, and was two contributors to the success of the project for sure.
And that's one of my favorite things about working at ISOs too, is as a services provider, as a consulting partner, we know every partnership relationship is about getting to know our customers and kind of adjusting our delivery model to fit. And so I remember being there in the beginning and the training wasn't right, we adjusted it very quickly. And that's what you got to do to be a good partner, right? You have to be able to pivot and you got to be able to adjust to fit the culture of a specific company you're working with. Bill, what about you? What were some roadblocks?
So we had a good partnership throughout. Things went pretty well. The one thing that popped into my mind when we did this is it kind of ties back to the try not to take your processes from ServiceNow and just recreate them in JSM. We had a very, I'll just call it a stupid process, where customers would call in, they'd talk to a team in Salesforce that's working out of Salesforce. That team would identify a bug with the product, and they would then log it with our development team in Jira. The development team would get the code ready, and they needed to deploy it into a specific environment. So then they'd log a ticket in ServiceNow. So now we've got one request running across 3 different systems, and in Jira it was really easy for the folks in Salesforce to see what was going on. We had a nice integration already. For the folks that in ServiceNow, they couldn't really see what was going on with the ticket, so we had a methodology where you could, with one group, you could add 150 watchers to a single ticket. So they felt that the business felt this was the way that they could get information across the systems. And JSM doesn't have a great way to, with a single click, add 150 people to watch any one thing, because it's kind of a stupid concept. Like, why would you do that? So we identified the issue. We worked with ISOs, worked with our architect, and then basically looked at what JSM could do. Figured out a methodology in which we could get actually key stakeholders watching the tickets. Instead of doing 150, we figured out a way to do 10 really easily without having to add people one at a time. In the process, we actually worked with a business to adjust some of their processes. And they enjoyed it, because now instead of them having 150 people getting notifications on every single ticket that's going on, they had 10 people that were getting the noise. So it consolidated things and made life a little bit better for folks. So making that migration, our roadblock is the tool didn't necessarily support something that was being done in a poor way, which I thought was fantastic. And it forced us to make some changes to operate a little bit more maturely.
And so now, Bill, let's go a little bit, still in the past, but a little bit closer to the present. You have your implementation, you switch from ServiceNow to Jira Service Management. When you go live with Jira Service Management, in the first couple of months, were there any big wins or aha moments that you really added value to Applied?
Yeah, so I think for us, the biggest kind of immediate value is we switched our operating model. So instead of every single request for updates and changes coming to a centralized team and that team doing everything for the business, we trained project admins within each of the business units on the basics of making updates to their forms, making updates to their request processes, and gave them some basics with JQL for reporting and for basic automation. So what was happening is the first couple of questions would come in. IT teams, our Atlassian team, they would help with making these changes, but it was a teach people how to fish, making sure that they were doing it themselves. And what we saw really quickly is once we showed somebody once or twice in conjunction with the training, they were off to the races. We no longer had all these requests coming in to us for the business to make updates and make changes. So that big kind of multi-year backlog that I had on ServiceNow just kind of disappeared overnight, because the teams were now starting to make the updates and the changes that they wanted as they were bringing on new capabilities and services, as they were supporting new things across the company. They could make the changes to their service portal, and they didn't have to wait on us. So the teams were loving this. Our teams were loving it because we had less backlog, And the things that we were starting to work on were more consultative in nature, advisory in nature, like kind of best practices, how if something was really, really hard, we could help them solve those problems. But you put the ability to make updates in the hands of the project teams. They loved it. And it was just a huge win across the board.
George, talk to me about wins at Brooks.
So for Brooks, it was a global game changer for us. We spent a lot of time towards the end of the project marketing and training the JSM to our business and to IT teams. And so adoption's key to any tool deployment project, right? You could hit all the milestones of the project itself, but if nobody's going to use the tool, then the whole investment's worthless. And I mentioned earlier that we had multiple tools, but we couldn't show IT value to the organization just because of the way they were configured and how we were working with it. But immediately, JSM, we were able to develop these reports and dashboards and get the data that we never had before to our organization in easily consumable ways. There was concern when we did this, though, right? Because we set some audacious goals, some SLAs that we thought were not going to really be attainable. So there was concern that the metrics are going to come out and we were going to show that we sucked. But it wasn't that at all. We saw that most of our teams were meeting these really high SLAs that we set for ourselves. And the teams that weren't, they were able to make some small changes based off the information we were getting so that they could get into the green. So, I mean, there was concern that we were not doing as well as we wanted, but I think deep down we all knew we were awesome. We just couldn't show it to the organization.
And so we're finally out of the past. We're back to the present. So Jira Service Management today, how are you using it? What teams are using it now? What's changed over the last couple of years of using JSM? And we'll start, George, with you.
Cool. So we brought incident or change and request into JSM initially. Since then, though, we've worked with some of our dev teams and we brought enhancement intake into JSM. And we've recently brought in vulnerability management with our information security team. We also have an integration with our HRIS solutions for onboarding and offboarding employees. But outside of IT, we've got our HQ facilities team using JSM, and we have other facility teams around the world, our manufacturing distribution center teams. They're kicking the tires to start using JSM as well.
Bill, what about you?
So for teams that are using it, so obviously IT, we've got procurement. We did create a custom procurement module within JSM as well. Our facilities are legal, security, a lot of the service and sales operations teams. So basically any operations focused teams within the company are using the tool. So our implementation, incident request, change, we implemented asset management. We've got Ops Genie in place. We're doing where we're seeing a lot of value is we're actually not just looking at JSM on its own. We've spent time working through flows on how tickets can come in through JSM, how they might move over to Jira boards for teams that are working within Jira. We're notorious for somebody logging a ticket saying, hey, I need 30 servers to go do something. You're like, that's more of a project. So we're implementing a whole intake project prioritization process within the tool. And then what a lot of our project teams are really liking and our engineering teams are really liking is we've been doing real tight integrations between Jira, JSM, and Confluence. So when we're working on projects, when we're working on information, all the fields and all the updates that we need to do go directly into JSM. And then we've got that automatically syncing over into Confluence so that all of our executive reporting is just happening within Confluence. They know where they need to go. And the project managers are actually only filling things out once within Jira. So they're saving hours each week in generating content and reports and trying to pull data from multiple systems. So doing those tight integrations, it's really helped our teams.
Bill, if you looked back into the past at that horrific, traumatic time you were on ServiceNow versus now you're on Jira Service Management? How would you compare your usage of both of the solutions?
So with ServiceNow, where we had teams asking if they could use other tools, JSM, we have teams asking if they can come onto the platform. There's actually enough of a positive wave on that we are bringing more and more teams and organizations. They're coming out of email, they're getting out of manual processes, they're getting out of other tools, and they're starting to consolidate into JSM just because they're seeing the value and the benefits that are happening across other teams. I think we've got improved SLAs. We're turning things around much quicker. We've got great dashboarding and where we're able to see problem like hotspots, things that we need to make sure that we are focusing on. We're not having things falling through the cracks anymore. With JSM, it's real easy to set up automations, and you don't have to be a full-blown developer to be able to do it. So we've got teams that they're automating part of their workflows and part of their ticket handling processes, which is making them more effective and more efficient at what they're doing. I talked about that center of excellence model. So we have less work coming into the central teams. The business is able to move at their speed, not waiting on other teams to do things. And then we're loving the simplicity of integration. It's been real easy for us to hook in low-code platforms or kind of hit into APIs. I mean, Sonia from our company, she was talking about how one of our VPs on his vacation just wrote code to do automations within the platform. The guy's weird, but really, really talented. So it's been a, I almost feel like it has democratized the ITSM platform to where teams are able to do a lot more themselves very easily. But with the APIs and the integrations that are available, you can really expand it and get significantly deeper should you want to.
George, what about you? What's the difference between ServiceNow and Jira at Brooks?
For us, the analytics perspective really is what we were able to use this data that we just couldn't get out of ServiceNow, and use it at a level that we never experienced before. JSM gives us the ability to provide like our performance indicators. Again, it's easy to consume. It's easy to set up to get that data. But I think kind of Bill mentioned this is that development, that enhancement. It's real easy to do that, and you don't need a lot of resources to do it. You know, I think we have a very small team, part-time, that's able to enhance and develop JSM the way we need to keep up with our business. Whereas before, we would have to, have a pool of people dedicated full-time to try and make that happen for us.
And so, George, we talked about the past, we're in the present. Let's talk a little bit about the future. So you're on Jira Service Management, you're happy. What are you doing next? What's on the horizon for Brooks?
Atlassian Assets is our next big adventure. We've partnered with ISOs once again. We have a lot of tools that we, have asset data in, and we're going to integrate those tools into Atlassian Assets. We're not looking for just a, plain old CMDB. We're looking for a fully functional ITAM platform, and we're going to use ISOs and Atlassian Assets to get us there.
Bill, what about you? What's the future at Applied?
So we're in phase 2 of our CMDB implementation. So we've got everything feeding into Atlassian Assets, but we've gone with Device 42 as our kind of discovery engine, and same idea, kind of partner marketplace component. We are doing a lot of what we're doing is fitting around more of just our overall strategy as a company. We want to improve our day zero experience. We're looking at consolidating all of our request processes, making sure those are all originating in JSM, even if they're being executed in other platforms. We're doing roles-based access. We're using JSM as an entry point for triggering things. We're doing self-service on all of our group access requests, integrating that in with Jira, JSM from a documentation perspective. So a lot of it is just we've now got our core platform, and now it's how do we up-level our processes and procedures and the things that we do within this platform.
And so the CMDB ITAM discovery is like a very common obviously for both of you, it's another commonality, but also in other customers that we have who move off of any platform to Jira, that's a very common phase 2 or phase 3 item, is to kind of like do a proper implementation of cloud discovery or what have you. So, that's a great project to take on after you move, once you get settled with ticketing and with incident change, et cetera. But let's go into the final question of the panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A if you guys want to ask any questions of George and Bill. And so the final question's very open-ended. Advice and lessons learned. So if you wanted to share something with the people in the audience around your journey and kind of adopting Jira Service Management, Bill, what would that advice or lessons learned be?
So I had a couple of them. First one, decide about your data early. That's going to have a big impact on your project and the amount of time and effort you put towards doing an ETL process. As you're doing your requirements, one of the things that a lot of people miss on very early is they don't spend time thinking through their KPIs. They don't spend time thinking through their reports and what's the data that they want to get out of the platform. A lot of people take the approach of, well, I don't know exactly how this platform is going to work. I don't know what type of information I'm going to be able to get out, so I'm just going to wait until the project is done and we're on it for a while to start trying to really build out my reports. You're going to end up with a lot of rework if you do that. Spend time up front thinking what information is important for how you run your organization, because your architect for your implementation is going to be so much more happy because they understand exactly what sort of data they need to be building into your processes, into your flows, so that they show up properly when you're trying to do your reports. And it can help with some of your training on how you're going to execute certain activities. So get your reporting, get your data defined early. That way the system can be configured to actually do what you want and report what you want. Last two items, JSM is super flexible. You've got the ability for project teams to make changes and updates to how they see fit. That is a positive and a negative all in one. You want to make sure that you define some company-wide standards on certain core processes. So maybe you want to make sure you have standardized SLAs across every project. It's really confusing for an executive when a priority 1 incident means something for one team and it means something completely different for another team. Your company's going to have a real hard time operating cohesively if you don't have some core standards around your KPIs, around your SLAs, and maybe some basic incident handling or request handling processes. So get the guardrails in place so that teams can actually work within those guardrails. And then the last thing, it couples well with the Atlassian announcement of university being free now. Send your people to some JQL training. So JQL opens up a whole world of possibilities for people to start customizing how they're looking at their dashboards, what data that they want to have show. And that's where you start getting like kind of the nerd excitement of like, holy crap, I just did this. And they're seeing like these really, it doesn't even have to be that complex, but they're seeing these cool dashboards that are exactly the information that they need to do their job. And it's real easy to pull this data out of the system with JQL if you've got a little bit of training. So with the classes now being free, a day or two, like somebody going through a session, the amount of things that they're going to be able to accomplish and customize to make themselves more efficient, you'll reap rewards just across your entire company.
George, what about you?
I just have a couple. So Bill touched on this a little bit, but look at what you really need and what truly adds value. Perhaps the legacy ITSM solution isn't the only thing that needs to be retired. And this might sound weird because I've been at Brooks for so long, but just because things have been around for a while doesn't mean they need to stay. And then executive sponsorship. I think that should go without saying. You can, preach best practices and the benefits of standardizing on a platform, but when stakeholders start to see that accountability and their performance is at stake, concerns arise. There could be doubt. So you're going to really want to be able to lean in on your leaders to bring everybody back together.
Awesome. George, Bill, first off, thank you both so much for taking the time to share your stories. We have a couple of minutes left. We've got 5 minutes and 55 seconds, as the timer says. Does anyone have any questions? Do you want to ask George? And okay, we've got some. Errands running. We got one right up here. We'll start, and then we've got one in the back. So you're gonna have to run into the back.
Okay.
Hey, thank you. It was very informative. Just one or two things that you wish JSM had. It can be either a feature or something is broken which you think they could have fixed it. Any one or things that you wish it had.
George, we'll start with you for that one.
So for me, in my role, some of the reporting, out of the box reporting that came with it is a little limited. I wish they would have a little more to it, a little more meat to like the visual effects you get out of the reporting. But there's a marketplace, and there's some really, really inexpensive tools out there that you can use to augment and enhance what JSM has right now.
Bill, anything for you?
So when we did our first implementation, we were struggling with the Atlassian access component. And our challenges were, Atlassian wasn't thinking about the access hierarchy, similar to how you would have things in an HRIS system or in Active Directory or whatever your identity management system was. So we were missing things like manager hierarchies, which were really important for us in some of our approval processes and workflows. So we ended up working with ISOs and actually taking our employee information and importing it into assets and setting up that hierarchy. And we had automated workflows that I think were coming from Okta, feeding into Atlassian to try and get that information that we needed so that our request processes would function appropriately. That is, from what I understand at this conference, those are problems that are getting fixed by Atlassian. So, and this is what we were seeing, like when we went on, OpsGenie wasn't really fully integrated. The Insight database wasn't fully integrated. These were relatively new acquisitions. So a lot of the challenges that we had on day one, they've been fixed over the last 18 months, the last 2 years. So, and I mean, we're just seeing that across the board. That's where Atlassian used to really focus on, I'd say, more of the small shops for Service Desk. They're now really going after the enterprise. And because of that, they're implementing the features that are much more important for larger enterprises.
Awesome. We've got time for one more question, I think.
Okay, I'm kind of interested because I'm actually in the same industry, also in garment manufacturing and sales, Arc'teryx. And we're doing the very same thing right now, it sounds like, as you guys did. And I'm curious, how is your asset management being handled before you started the integration? And going forward into the future, Device 42, do they play a role continuing on for you guys, or are you going to be handling all of that in-house?
So are we outsourcing like the support management?
No,
or?
You said Device 42 was helping you with the integration, with the asset discovery.
Gotcha.
Are they going to be helping you in the future with that, or is that just a one-off thing?
No, it's actually our product that we're going to be using for third party, or for all of our ongoing discovery. So the way our architecture is set up is I've got asset management in place for all of my endpoints, for my laptops and user components. I've got inventory for my different offices. The Assets has a discovery agent.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
It's not great. It works well in a Windows, like kind of traditional environment, but you're gonna have a harder time with like Linux discovery. You're gonna have a harder time with Macs. So appliances, things along those lines. And I don't think, at least when we looked at it, it wasn't supportive of the cloud. So that's where we went to Device 42 because it basically has discovery across all those systems. It's got great integrations into other tools that we're using like Intune or Jamf for Kanji. And it also had capabilities of doing discovery within the cloud environments. So we've got workloads in GCP and Azure and up in AWS. So Device 42 had that real mature, flexible, works well in all of our environments. So it's doing all of our discovery. It's building out our relationships for us. But we have that syncing into assets within Jira so that we can then real closely tie that into our change management processes. We can tie it into our request processes, all of our incident processes. So we can now start getting much richer data on not only what do we have, but how's the business interacting with what we have.
Yeah, I mean, we can't wait. Like, we're just starting the process right now. But I'm curious just about the long term. Like, are you always going to be relying on these third-party vendors to make sure things are up to date, or are you gonna be
So
able to?
Device 42, yeah, is going to be our vendor of choice for our ongoing implementation of CMDB and Discovery.
Okay.
I think depending on what Atlassian does with the Insights project and maturing, we could evaluate making a change in the future. But for our needs, we needed something that had a few more capabilities than what the default inbuilt database and Discovery had. And like I said at the beginning, this is where I love Atlassian is. At ServiceNow, I was stuck with what ServiceNow had. I couldn't really go elsewhere. With Atlassian, I said, okay, here's what you have. It meets these requirements, but then I could go partner with Device 42 and they could fill out my needs.
Yeah, like our problem was just bandwidth internally, where they were like, great, and we're going to do this. And we're like, who's going to do this? And then that's where the third-party vendor came in.
Yep, absolutely.
And so, George, you got lucky. We are out of time, so you do not have to answer that one. But could I get a round of applause for George and Bill? And so if you want to come by and have a more personal kind of conversation about your Jira Service Management journey, ISOS, we have a huge booth right near the Atlassian Center, so it's right in the middle of the show floor. Please come by and ask us some questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.